This conference will now be recorded.
So today we are discussing regarding asthma diagnosis and management, right? Okay, everyone is there, right? Hello, everyone.
జాయిన్ అవుతున్నారు మేము అందరం.
ఇంకా టైం ఉందమ్మా. Sorry, let them join. I'll start the class or else we are running short of time, right? So already in the previous class you discussed regarding clinical features, etiology of asthma. Today the rest of the class is going to continue, that is diagnosis and management. So you all know asthma is not a curable but controllable disease like diabetes mellitus. First of all, before treating any disease, we have to properly diagnose the case, right? So the diagnosis of asthma is mostly a clinical thing. It requires three components. That is, one is we have to take the proper history, that is good history taking. Another next important is careful physical examination. We need to examine properly. And whenever required, we have to perform some investigations, not necessarily every time. So these are the three requisites done to properly diagnose the case of asthma. So one is history taking, another one is physical examination, and another one is investigations whenever required. Coming to the history, the asthma need not be present in every time at like with typical symptoms, but the typical symptoms that are presented in the case of asthma are wheeze, shortness of breath, that is dyspnea. Another one more is chest tightness and dry cough. The cough which is dry and persistent, almost like months together. And the most common chronic symptoms of asthma are intermittent dry coughing and expiratory wheezing. These are the typical symptoms one may present for you in your OPDs, like typical symptoms of asthma are wheeze, shortness of breath, chest tightness, and cough. Coming to the older children and adults, shortness of breath, chest congestion, and tightness will be there. In younger children, there may be like intermittent non-focal chest pain is the only presenting complaint. We cannot get every typical symptom like wheeze, shortness of breath, or chest tightness, or cough. Coming to the history part, first of all, for any case, we'll ask symptomatology. What could be the symptoms? But for asthma, we have to be more cautious in regarding the environmental history because it is one of the triggering factor for the aggravating features of the asthma or any other clinical features. So an environmental history is essential for optimal asthma management. We need to ask in history itself what could be the treatment history. Is there any history of previous usage of bronchodilators or any history of nebulizations or any history of frequent OPD visits? That also helps you in leading for the proper diagnosis without any confusion. So in the treatment history, one must ask, is there any symptomatic improvement with the treatment with bronchodilators? I think you people know what are the bronchodilators like beta-2 agonists like salbutamol and all those things. And one must ask appropriately regarding the risk factors. Those are called allergic conditions like any allergic dermatitis, any contact dermatitis, any atopies there. And also parental history of asthma, one should ask. And symptoms apart from cold also one should ask. Coming to the further, we have to ask whether the child had recurrent episodes of wheezing or not. See, in early childhood, if the child is having recurrent episodes of wheezing and aggravating factors like any viruses like respiratory syncytial virus, influenza virus, metapneumovirus, all these causes recurrent episodes of wheezing. These early wheezers need not be every time lands up into an asthma, but may sometimes they may progress into asthma. And one more thing, does the child have a troublesome cough which is particularly worse at night or on waking? That is cough variant asthma. One should be aware of that. And previously we also discussed other differential diagnosis for persistent cough is another one more thing is pertussis. One should be in clear whether this cough is particularly worsening at night or something, and we have to be cautious in asking the type of cough. Is the child awakened by coughing or difficulty in breathing? One should ask. Does the child cough or wheeze after physical activity? Because this is due to exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. And as the child experience breathing problems during a particular season, one should have seasonal variations to get an accurate diagnosis. Coming to the examination part, so we already discussed the three things. One is history, another one is physical examination, another one is if at all requiring any investigations we need to perform or not. So we discussed till now the history taking part. One should be appropriate regarding the symptomatology, any environmental history, type of cough, any night awakenings are there or not, and also any other allergic conditions, parental history, and all of these things we should history. Coming to the examination part, one have to examine the child. How is the child in your first visit? You have to inspect for every case for any systemic examination, right? Am I clear? Lalit Sai, am I clear? Okay, we'll continue. If any problem is there, you can just tell me. Shall I continue? Okay, I'll answer clear. ఇదని ఉంచేసేయండి నాకు కనిపిస్తుంది. Anjali, am I audible for you people?
Yes, ma'am.
Shall I continue? If any problem is there, just you can tell me, or else I couldn't understand whether you people are following the class or not.
There's no problem, ma'am. We're following.
Okay, fine, nice. So coming to the inspection part, we have to examine the child. First, look at the child, whether the child is having any breathlessness or whether the child is comfortable or not. And then we have to examine if any retractions are there or not. What is the respiratory rate? What is the whether the child is using any accessory muscles of respiration? How is the pattern of breathing? One should examine. How will be the child if the child is having bronchial asthma or any episode? The child will be breathless, and there will be shortness of breath. Tachypnea will be there, and axillary muscles of respiration will be more prominent, like flaring of ala nasae, and all will be there. Mostly the child will be having suprasternal and subcostal retractions. Coming to the auscultation part, expiratory wheezing and a prolonged phase of expiration will be there in acute exacerbations. Crackles and rhonchi, excessive mucus inflammatory exudate in the airways will be present because of all the inflammatory products that resulting in segmental atelectasis and everything. So crackles and rhonchi one may hear, and regional hyperventilation will be there, resulting in owing to airways obstruction. Coming to the signs, usually for a bronchial asthma case, there will be no mediastinal shift because both the lungs are equally hyperventilated. On percussion, it will be more of resonant because of more of air trapping will be there. Breath sounds usually vesicular with prolonged expiration because of episodic airflow obstruction of the main bronchus, resulting in going air out of the lungs will be difficult. So, with a prolonged expiration, vocal resonance is normal. In severe episodes, how will be the child is? The child will be in air hunger and fatigue, landing into respiratory failure. Because of hypoxia, the child will be cyanosed, and there will be pulse paradoxes, and sometimes cardiac failure leading to cardiac arrhythmias, and automatically we already discussed on percussion. We hear the hyperresonant note. There will be sometimes segmental collapse. At last, these may disappear because of there will be no air in or out, resulting in massive obstruction of the airways. So one must not be happy if the child is worsening and the wheeze got disappeared. That means the child is landing into respiratory failure rather than the child's improvement, because one should assess general condition properly whether the child is improving or not. Coming to the differential diagnosis part, one must be very careful in diagnosing asthma. So one must have the proper outlook of all the probable conditions that mimics asthma. So these are the common differential diagnoses one may miss or one may confuse with asthma. So first, if the age is less than 6 months, common conditions are like mimicking or bronchiolitis and gastroesophageal reflux. It is too early to label the diagnosis of asthma at the age of 6 months. So one must look for other causes like bronchiolitis, which is most common. It is mostly due to respiratory syncytial virus. And another one is gastroesophageal reflux. Because of the transient esophageal relaxations, the contents will get aspirated, resulting in some sort of like aspiration pneumonias and wheezing episodes, and the child will be having all the clinical features resembling asthma. So one must give a trial of treating gastroesophageal reflux before jumping and putting the diagnosis of asthma. And some other uncommon conditions that comes under differential diagnosis are aspiration pneumonias, bronchopulmonary dysplasias, congestive cardiac failure, and cystic fibrosis. Rare in this age group is asthma and foreign body aspirations. Coming to 6 months to 2 years of age, again the common thing is bronchiolitis. And here next one is foreign body aspiration. But in foreign body aspiration, usually the onset will be sudden, not in like of asthma like months together, or it is not an insidious onset, it is a sudden onset. Usually with the unilateral hyperinflation of lungs, because one side obstruction will be there at that point, compensated hyperinflation will be there. And uncommon differential diagnoses are like aspiration pneumonias, cystic fibrosis, bronchopulmonary dysplasias, and gastroesophageal reflux. The rare is congestive cardiac failure. In 2 to 5 years of age, the common things are the most common presentation is asthma, and next one is foreign body aspiration, because the children will be too picky to put something in their mouth. And the other uncommon are the same thing. And the rare conditions comes like aspiration pneumonias, congestive cardiac failure, and gastroesophageal reflux. So coming to the investigations part, one thing is asthma predictability index, and how much we can predict. That is identifying the risk factors for developing persistent asthma. One is major criteria, and the next is minor criteria. Major criteria includes whether any parental history is there or not, any history of atopic dermatitis, evidence of sensitization to aeroallergens. These comes under major criteria to predict the asthma, that is called as asthma predictability index. Minor criteria, is there any evidence of sensitization to particular foods, or 4% or higher peripheral blood eosinophilia, or like peripheral blood eosinophil count will be so wheezing apart from the cold. Coming to the investigations, we do pulmonary function tests, absolute eosinophil count, chest X-ray, and allergy tests. Coming to the pulmonary function test by using spirometry, this test will be performed from the age of 6 years. It is difficult for the child of less than 6 years to undergo for this test. But spirometry is a pulmonary function test that measures the volume of air an individual inhales or exhales as a function of time. This is the investigation of choice. Coming to the role of spirometry in asthma. Why do we use spirometry in asthma? It helps to make the diagnosis and to assess the degree of airflow obstruction, to predict whether obstruction is reversible or not, and it helps in management of asthma and to monitor the progression of disease. This is a picture. I think you people are very well versed with all these things like tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, and residual volume. And these are the lung capacities. Coming to in detail, like what is tidal volume? That is air that moves into lung with each quiet inspiration. Typically, it is around 500 ml. What is inspiratory reserve volume? That is air that can still be breathed in after normal inspiration. So after maximum inspiration, what is the amount of air that can be breathed in during respiration? It is called as inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume, that is air that can still be breathed out after normal expiration. Coming to the residual volume, that is air left out in lungs after maximal expiration. Coming to the inspiratory capacity, that is inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume. Functional residual capacity, that is total of residual volume plus expiratory reserve volume. Vital capacity is combining of all these three things like tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume. Total lung capacity is all the four things including residual volume, that is volume of the gas present in lungs after a maximal inspiration. These are the loops that one can appreciate. First one is the normal, and here the thing we can see the obstructive lesion. Upside loops are expiratory loops, and inner downside loops are inspiratory loops, that is flow in liters per second. In expiration, you see the shift of curve of the curve is shifting towards the left because of the airflow limitation and airflow obstruction. These are the same thing that you can see subject 1 and subject 2 in the right side graph. That is, first one is the non-asthmatic chain and second one is the asthmatic chain. With how much the forced expiratory volume FEV1 is present, that is 100% of predicted in non-asthmatic child and 62% of predicted in asthmatic child. The blue curve is the normal and the red curve that is indicating subject 2 is the asthmatic child. That is the FEV1 is low, that is only 62% of predicted FEV1 we can observe. These are the same things like expiratory flow volume loops and inspiratory flow volume loops. The first one, A, is the normal, and depending upon the limit of airflow obstruction, that is B, C, D, E, automatically the more the severity of obstruction, the curve will not be completely well inflated enough. So this indicates the severity of obstruction. So investigation, another one more thing is peak expiratory flow rate. Maximum flow rate is generated during forceful exhalation. It is using a portable peak flow meter. It is effort dependent. Diurnal variation is of more than 20%, and it is less than 80% predicted. More than 20% improvement after bronchodilator therapy is indicated. You see, this peak expiratory flow rate we cannot say instantly during one reading of peak expiratory flow rate gives us any clue regarding asthma. We have to monitor almost, we have to do every day, like 2 times. We have to check for the diurnal variation as well as the nocturnal variation. We have to check continuously and we have to take the readings. How is the variation? And we have to, there will be 3 zones like yellow, green, and red zone. And how the predictability will be varying. It is not a single test and it is somewhat less efficient than spirometry, but because it is a portable thing and we can do in a OPD basis, we can use better than spirometry. This is the peak expiratory flow rate machine. Coming to the investigations part, we have already discussed like eosinophil count will be more like more than 4%. Eosinophil percentage we have to calculate eosinophils into WBC count. Normally it's around 30 to 350 cells per microliter. Eosinophilia inference means that is more than 500 cells per microliter. Coming to the chest X-ray, usually we see hyperinflation of both the lung fields, that is bilateral and symmetrical air trapping will be there. Bronchial coughing may occur due to presence of edema fluid in perivascular and peribronchial interstitial spaces. So, how to approach a diagnosis like this? Patient with any respiratory symptoms, are the symptoms are typical of asthma? If at all, yes, we have to do detailed history and examination for asthma. History and examination supports asthma diagnosis. If at all, yes, then perform spirometry or peak expiratory flow rate with reversibility test. If it is result is supporting of asthma, then treat it as asthma. For suppose if at all any detailed history or examination it doesn't support you of diagnosis, then further history and test for alternative diagnosis should be used, like alternative diagnosis confirmed or not. If at all yes, treat an alternative diagnosis. So we are not getting any clue for alternative diagnosis. Repeat on another occasion or arrange other tests to confirm the asthma. If at all in that also the asthma diagnosis is not, we are not getting towards the asthma, then consider trial of treatment for most likely diagnosis or refer for further investigations. After performing the history and examination, if at all clinical urgency and other diagnoses are unlikely, then we have to start with empirical treatment with the inhalational corticosteroids. And PRN means whenever necessary, it is a Latin word, with short-acting beta agonists. We have to review the response, and diagnostic testing should be performed within 1 to 3 months. These are the IAP guidelines. That is 3 or more episodes of atrial obstruction with several of the following. Those are febrile episodes. Usually asthma will not be present with fever. Any history of personal atopy or family history of atopy or asthma. Any nocturnal exacerbations are there or not. Whether the symptoms are aggravated with exercise. Any symptoms due to triggers like thyroallergens or any infectious things. Any seasonal exacerbations. Relief with bronchodilators or any with steroids. So these are the things. These are IAP guidelines along with the 3 or more episodes of atrial obstruction with these following things. So before going to drugs, what do we treat? Like treatment objectives of the asthma, one should be aware that before the child should be free from acute asthmatic attacks. One should remember before, because that is not like a thing like we are going to give the drugs or we are treating the disease. Not like that. We have to specify our treatment objectives before jumping and giving to treatment. That is, the child should be free from acute asthmatic attacks, symptoms including nocturnal cough, and also emergency doctor and hospital visits should be reduced. And also we should be proper enough that minimal need of requiring beta 2 agonists for the child, and also minimal or no adverse effects from the medicines. And at last, the child should be having normal physical activity, including participation in sports, as well as maintain the child's normal lung function as close to the possible. Last but not the least, one should be carefully assessing the growth of the child. So the treatment strategy is completely like achieving optimal control, requiring a multifaceted strategy. So it includes identifying and avoiding triggers that makes asthma worse. Achieve control by selecting appropriate medication. Medication is one of the part of the treatment, that not only the sole treatment of the asthma. Treat asthma attacks promptly and effectively. And also education of the parents to manage their condition is also important. And also to monitor and modify asthma care to maintain effective long-term control. This is the proper treatment strategy. One should be keep in mind that before treating the child with asthma, along with the drugs, all these should come under. So coming to the drugs, we use drugs used in asthma, bronchodilators, anti-inflammatory agents, and leukotriene antagonists. To briefly classify what are the drugs that used in asthma, one is reliever and another one is preventer. So relievers are like to treat the bronchospasm and to relieve the acute attacks. Like if the child is in emergency department with the bronchoconstriction, we have to treat the bronchospasm rather than giving other drugs. First, you have to treat the bronchospasm immediately, so that then the drug comes to relieve the bronchospasm is bronchodilator. So those bronchodilators are like selectively short-acting beta-2 agonists. Those are salbutamol and terbutaline, and non-selective beta agonist is adrenaline. So other relievers that can be used are anticholinergic. These are muscarinic antagonists like ipratropium bromide, and oral steroids. These comes under both the categories of relievers as well as preventers. Another one is methylxanthine, that is theophylline. Coming to the preventers group comes like inhaled steroids, diclamethasone, budesonide. All these steroids are preventers. And also mast cell stabilizers like sodium chromoglycolate, nicorandil sodium, all these things. And long-acting beta-2 agonists are also preventers like salmeterol and formoterol. Formoterol is even most long-acting. The T-half of both these drugs are 12 hours, but mechanism of action of formoterol is within 15 minutes. And other preventer groups like already we discussed, like leukotriene antagonists, like montelukast, jafarlukast. But so these are the drugs. One is relievers and one are preventers. And other drugs are like antibodies like ocrelizumab, that is IgE antibody, recombinant humanized monoclonal IgE antibody. So these are the drugs used in asthma. This is the normal airway. This is the airway in asthma. So you can see clearly in the picture, everything is aggravated, like mucosal edema, mucus flux secretion, airway edema, glands are hypertrophied and hyperplasia, smooth muscle hyperplasia, you can notice everything. So these are the drugs used in asthma. First, the best thing is exposure to antigen, one should avoid. The next is Ig mast cell antibody. We already discussed. This is a recombinant humanized monoclonal antibody which acts against IgE. So next is steroids that inhibits the inflammatory mediators. Once the mediators are released, we have to use either leukotriene receptor antagonists. Beta-2 agonists, we already discussed. Bronchodilators helps in early response where they relieve from bronchoconstriction, and later inflammatory response, that is steroids are used to prevent the bronchial hyperreactivity. So steroids reduce inflammation in this predominantly inflammatory illness. Coming to the beta-2 agonists, we already discussed. Beta-2, we all know these are the drugs of choice in asthma. It relaxes bronchial smooth muscle used during acute exacerbation. Salmeterol and formoterol, these are long-acting agents for prophylaxis. Adverse effects are tremors and arrhythmias. Coming to the steroids, we already discussed. Steroids reduce inflammation in the predominantly inflammatory illness. Fluticasone and budesonide, these inhibit the synthesis of all the cytokines, inactivates nuclear factor transcription factor that induces production of tumor necrosis factor alpha and other inflammatory agents. First line therapy for chronic asthmatics. Muscarinic antagonists like ipratropium and tiotropium bromide. It is useful usually as an adjunct with salbutamol in the treatment of acute severe asthma. Dose is in less than 1 year we use 0.5 ml and more than 1 year we use 1 ml. It has a longer duration of action and lesser systematic side effects compared to atropine. Smaller children with spasmodic cough usually respond well to ipratropium as compared to salbutamol. Coming to the anti-leukotrienes, one is leukotriene receptor antagonist, one is leukotriene synthesis inhibitor. Xelutin comes under leukotriene synthesis inhibitor. It is a 5-lipoxygenase pathway inhibitor. It blocks conversion of arachidonic acid to leukotrienes, but this is not used because it is hepatotoxic. If at all, if you want to use it, it should be used more than 12 years of age. Montelukast and zafirlukast, these are leukotriene receptor antagonists. It is especially good for aspirin-induced and exercise-induced asthma. But the side effects of montelukast is mood swings. The child is on chronically, like if at all the child is having mild or moderate persistent asthma, the child is on montelukast, one must advise the parents regarding mood changes and mood swings in the child. So we have to think regarding whether to continue with the drug or we have to stop the drug. Mood swings is one of the side effects of montelukast. The maximum dose of montelukast is 5 mg. Coming to the omalizumab, it binds mostly unbound serum IgE used in allergic asthma with IgE levels resistant to inhaled steroids and long-acting beta-2 agonists. Another one is methylxanthines. It likely causes bronchodilation by inhibiting phosphodiesterase metabolized by cytochrome P450. It is also adenosine antagonist, and it has a possible role in improving diaphragmatic contractility and inflammatory modulation, thereby having additional effect. Used only in the age of more than 5 years. Usually give loading dose of 5 to 10 mg per kg per hour, followed by 0.5 to 1 mg per kg per hour. So if we are giving aminophylline, we have to reduce the dose of other beta-2 agonists like terpitalin to be 50% when concurrently used with this aminophylline. The side effects of aminophylline are like GI symptoms like vomiting and gastritis, and cardiac arrhythmias, cardiac tachycardia as one must expect, and CNS toxicities are irritability and seizures. So one must monitor the levels if possible because of the narrow therapeutic index. Drug interactions are also there where H2 blockers and macrolides increases the levels of aminophylline where the drug dosage modification is required. So this is not that much advisable. Coming to the dosage of each and individual drug, I don't think you people require all these doses. Only you just remember only one drug, that is salbutamol. It is available in residues as well as respiratory solution. In respiratory solution, 1 ml contains 5 mg. In residues, usually 3 ml contains 2.5 mg. The dose is 0.15 mg per kg per dose. These are the methods or modes how we administer drug. If the child is less than 4 years old, MDI with spacer with face mask is advisable. If child more than 4 years old, MDI with spacer is preferred. If children more than 12 years old, MDI used directly. Use of spacer improves the drug deposition. Coming to the classification of asthma. So before treating, one must classify. So this is the asthma severity classification. One is intermittent. Next is persistent. In persistent, it again consists of mild, moderate, and severe. In intermittent, the daytime symptoms are less than 2 days in a week. Nighttime awakenings, again, if at all age is more than 5 years, it is less than 2 episodes per month. Usage of short-acting beta-2 agonists are less than 2 days per week. And in intermittent asthma, there will be no interference with the normal activity of the child. In mild persistent asthma, there are more than 2 episodes, 2 per 2 days in a week, but not daily. Nighttime awakenings in 0 to 4 years of age, 1 to 2 episodes in a month. More than 5 years, 3 to 4 episodes in a month. And requiring of short-acting beta-2 agonists are more than 2 days in a week. Like requiring how many daytime symptoms are there, then we use beta-2 agonists at the same pace, right? So more than 2 days a week of daytime symptoms requiring more than 2 days per week, but not daily, at not more than one on any day. There will be minor limitation of activity or interference with the normal activity of the child. In coming to the moderate, the daytime symptoms almost daily, nighttime awakenings are more than 1 episode in a week, and regular usage of short-acting beta-2 agonist, that requirement is daily, and some limitations will be there for the child's normal activity. In severe persistent asthma, daytime symptoms versus throughout the day. Nighttime awakenings, if at all age of more than 5 years, almost every day in a week. And requiring short-acting beta agonists almost several times per day. And there will be extreme limitation of physical activity of the child. Coming to the lung function, FEV1 in intermittent, it is normal between, and it is more than 80% of predicted. Mild is more than 80% of predicted, moderate is 60 to 80% of predicted, and severe is less than FEV1 is less than 60% of predicted. FEV1 by FEC, that is again it divides into two categories of age 5 to 11 years and age of more than 12 years. More than 85% in intermittent, more than 80% in mild, more 75 to 80% in moderate, and less than 75% in severe. This is the coming to the approach of control of asthma. We already discussed everything like drugs and all those things. Two categories of drugs, those are relievers and preventers. We already discussed. So how we control the asthma in stepwise approach. It divides into, depending upon the age group, that is 0 to 4 years, 5 to 11 years, and more than 12 years of age. In step 1, requirement of short-acting beta agonist. In step 2, low dose of inhalational corticosteroids are required. Step 3, medium dose of inhalational corticosteroids. Step 4, medium dose of inhalational corticosteroids along with long-acting beta agonists or leukotriene receptor antagonists. Step 5, inhalational corticosteroids requiring in high doses along with long-acting beta agonists or leukotriene receptor antagonists. And step 6, step 5, and along with oral steroids are used. So classification of asthma control, whether the asthma is well controlled or not. Again, it classifies into three types, that is whether the asthma is well controlled, not well controlled, or very poor control, depending upon the symptomatology, depending upon the nighttime awakenings, depending upon the requirement of beta-2 agonists, and interference with the normal activity, like in the previous classification. So management in a grade wise, like in intermittent asthma, that is step 1, usually reliever is required, that is like inhaled beta-2 agonists whenever required. In grade 2, like mild persistent asthma, we need a preventer as well as reliever. Like preventer, we use daily low dose inhaled steroids or leukotriene receptor antagonists. And as reliever therapy, we require inhaled beta-2 agonists as and when required, but less than 3 to 4 times per day. If at all increasing of relievers is requiring more and more, that indicates we need a proper long-term control and we need to modify the drugs. In moderate persistent asthma, the same thing, but we use step 3 that already we discussed, like daily low dose inhaled steroid along with long-acting beta-2 agonist, or only daily medium dose corticosteroids are required. Medium doses is around 400 to 800 micrograms of steroids. In severe persistent asthma, like in step 4, daily high dose of inhaled steroid along with daily long-acting bronchodilator along with leukotriene receptor antagonist, and requirement of reliever is more. If increased use may indicate need for long-term control therapy. So control of asthma, if asthma is not controlled, step up the treatment. Improvement is generally seen within 1 month. So this is not a treatment of single day or a week. It almost requires a month. So whenever, if the child is appropriately well controlled or not, we have to upgrade. If the child is not controlling on the proper treatment, we have to upgrade. If the child is responding well, then we can step down the approach. So if the asthma is not controlled, then step up the treatment. Improvement is generally seen within a 1 month. If asthma is partly controlled, consider stepping up treatment depending more effective options are available, safety and cost of possible treatment, and patient satisfaction with the level of control achieved. If controlled asthma is maintained for at least 3 months, step down with gradual stepwise reduction in treatment. So it is not a single day treatment. One must either step up or step down the treatment depending upon the response of the patient. So the next topic is, till now we discussed management of asthma. The next topic is acute severe asthma, that is status asthmaticus. So you all know the definition. It is a condition of progressively worsening bronchospasm which is unresponsive to conventional therapy, that is inhaled beta-2 agonists or oral or IV steroids and oxygen, and that leads to pulmonary insufficiency. It is a medical emergency that requires immediate recognition and treatment. Coming to pathophysiology, you people are very well versed with this. That is, asthma is a chronic inflammatory disorder characterized by airflow obstruction due to high airway hyperresponsiveness, resulting in bronchospasm, mucosal edema, mucus plugging of small airways. All this causes lower airways obstruction, decrease in airway diameter, resulting in more of airflow resistance. In normal individuals, what will happen is during inspiration, there will be a negative pleural pressure, resulting in physiological intrathoracic airway dilatation, and during expiration, pleural pressure becomes 0 and there will be physiological narrowing. In status asthmaticus, this normal mechanism gets exaggerated, easier air entry during inspiration but obstructed airflow during expiration. Usually the expiration is a passive. Here expiration becomes an active process, resulting in high energy expenditure as well as increase in work of breathing. Diaphragmatic flattening results from hyperinflation, and this is again an additional mechanical disadvantage. So what happens for the gas exchange in asthma is airflow obstruction, resulting in ventilation perfusion mismatch, leading to hypoxemia, thereby causing reflex tachypnea and initial hypocarbia. As airway obstruction worsens, increased dead space due to hyperinflated alveoli and respiratory muscle fatigue, resulting in retention of the carbon dioxide. So ultimately leading to the respiratory failure. Coming to the assessment of severity, first in initial evaluation, for all the patients, one have to check for airway breathing and circulation. Airway, can the patient maintain his or her airway, or the mental status adequate to protect the airway or not? You have to see whether the airway is patent or not, requiring any measures of artificial ventilation, or whether the child is breathing normally, or any sort of tachypnea or any respiratory failure. And the mental status, the child is alert or drowsy. So next is coming to the breathing. What is the degree of air exchange? Is the patient is cyanotic or not? Respiratory rate of more than 50 per minute, or like whether the child is tachypneic or not. Coming to the circulation, how is the perfusion and how are the pulses? Because it can cause obstructive shock. Coming to the history, in that acute episode, we need not take elaborative history, but one must ask these points, like any history, previous history of wheezing episodes are there or not. If non-asthmatic, what are the maintenance medications? How is the compliance of the drug? When was the last claim that he took any medication of last aerosols, or any history regarding previous clinics or emergency department visits, previous hospitalizations, intubations, and last steroid course? When did the exacerbation begin? What are the precipitating factors for the child? And general medical history, including any other medications, whether the child is using or not. And the history of family history of atopy or asthma. We need not go on elaborating all these complaints when the child is an emergency, but one must ask relevant history. Coming to the physical examination, vitals, one must check what is the temperature. Sometimes fever may indicate upper respiratory tract infection or pneumonias or any other source of infection. How is the pulse? Usually tachycardic even before the treatment. Why even before treatment? Salbutamol causes tachycardia. Respiratory rate, usually the child will be tachypneic, but if the child is tachypneic and the child is going on to drowsy and the child's respiratory rate is going on decreasing, that is not a good sign. That indicates respiratory failure. How is the blood pressure? Because to know whether pulsus paradoxus is there or not. Coming to the examination part, chest examination, there must be air movement in order to appreciate wheezing. If the child is initially having wheezing, and later on if the child presents with you to the silent chest, that also indicates complete airflow obstruction. That is not a treatment improvement. If the child initially presents with the air hunger or a silent chest, upon your treatment, if you are hearing some wheeze, that indicates the airway obstruction is partially relieved, and you can hear some air entry in and out of the lungs. Next is symmetry of breath sounds. Some asymmetry may be heard with asthma alone due to mucus plugging and atelectasis. There may be segmental atelectasis and everything. So sometimes bronchi apart, along with the bronchi, we can hear crackles. That indicates because of the mucus plugging in the alveoli, segmental atelectasis and focal atelectasis can be there, which may confuse. It could be like bacterial pneumonia. So one of the possible differential diagnosis. Increased wheezing unilaterally may indicate presence of a foreign body. Significantly decreased breath sounds unilaterally may indicate pneumonia or pneumothorax. And one must see the use of axillary respiratory muscles along, because it correlates with severity of airway obstruction. Wheezing is less sensitive indicator of the degree of obstruction present. Feel for the presence of crepitus in the neck or chest wall, signifying air leak and significant obstruction. Coming to classification, mild to moderate exacerbation, severe exacerbation, and danger signs requiring intubation. How is the neurological status? Mild to moderate exacerbation, neurological status will be alert. There will be no physical exhaustion. Usually the child talks in sentences. The saturation in room air will be 91 to 93%. No accessory muscles usage, and air entry will be normal. Extent of wheeze will be present. ABG, PCO2 is low or normal. Coming to severe exacerbation, neurological status, the child will be alert, no physical exhaustion, toxin phrases, but oxygen requirement to maintain saturation of more than 92%. Usage of axillary muscles will be there, but it is moderate. Air entry is normal, but may be reduced at bases. Extensive wheeze one can hear. PCOT is normal or high. Coming to the danger signs requiring intubation, the child will be drowsy, response only to pain, sweating, and the child will be hypotonic. Physical exhaustion will be there. The toxin 1 to 2 words or ill-sustained cry will be there. Cyanosis even with the supplementation of oxygen. Marked accessory muscles of respiration usage will be there. Air entry, silent chest signifying critically reduced tidal volumes. Absent wheeze in phase of severe retractions. ABG showing retention of carbon dioxide and also significant metabolic acidosis due to tissue hypoxia. So life-threatening asthma is characterized by, already we discussed, like unable to cry, cyanosis, feeble chest movements, absent breath sounds, fatigue or exhausted, altered sensorium, and oxygen saturation of less than 9% in pulse oximeter. These are the things. These are the lab investigations, like chest X-ray, ABG, serum electrolytes, and complete blood count. Management. What are the aims in management of acute asthma in an emergency room is to break the cycle of bronchoconstriction and impaired ventilation, and to reduce inflammation in the airway with steroids, offer supportive ventilation as necessary, and to treat the precipitating factors. The three cornerstones of severe asthma management in emergency room is oxygen. You all know hypoxia is due to ventilation perfusion mismatch, and also beta agonist which we use may increase hypoxia by attenuating the hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. Hence, oxygen should always be administered along with nebulized beta-2 agonist. So only drug is not enough. Along with that, oxygen one must give, because of the ventilation perfusion mismatch that occurs due to salbutamol is much more worsening and it causes devastating results. So oxygen should be given along with the beta-2 agonist, and to maintain oxygen saturation between 90 to 95%. So the drug is salbutamol, less than 6 years. The dose is 2.5 mg of maximum. More than 6 years, 5 mg of salbutamol. So nebulized beta-2 agonist, in what way we give is nebulization. So dose we already discussed. Dilute in normal saline only, never with distilled water. Coming to steroids, we already discussed in the previous slides, like steroids reduce inflammation, the predominantly inflammatory illness. Should be used early in patients with acute severe asthma. Without steroids requiring IV, the child is unable to take orally. Hydrocortisone and methylprednisolone may be administered IV if patient is unable to take oral steroids. So one should assess every 20 minutes to see if the treatment is effective or not. So once we started the IV steroids, it may be stopped after 48 hours or after improvement commences to thrice daily dosages. Inhaled or nebulized steroids are generally used as preventive therapy. However, some shows benefits even in acute asthma even. And next is obtain IV access and cardiorespiratory and saturation monitoring. Oxygen, high flow oxygen at 10 to 15 liters per minute via non-rebreathing mask. IV fluids, resuscitation for a patient in shock, 20 ml per kg IV bolus of normal saline. Maintenance fluids to be given. Avoid overhydration. Restrict 2/3 of fluids to maintain serum sodium of 138 milliequivalents per liter. Potassium infusions may be required if serum potassium is less than 3 milliequivalents per liter. Coming to steroids, already we discussed IV steroids of hydrocortisone, start dose of 2 to 4 mg per kg, followed by 1 to 2 mg per kg every 6th hourly. Then switch to oral steroids when the child becomes better. Add gastric H2 blockers to prevent gastric acid suppression. Beta-2 agonist already we discussed. Subcutaneous agonist, subcutaneous dose of terbutaline or adrenaline. The dose is 0.01 mg per kg per dose. Maximum of 0.3 mg can be repeated every 15 to 20 minutes for 3 doses. IV beta agonist, salbutamol. If at all, if we are using IV beta agonist, till now we discussed regarding nebulized salbutamol. Loading dose of 5 microgram per kg per hour over 1 hour, followed by continuous infusion. Next drug that comes is ipratropium nebulization. This is an anticholinergic. Usually it is used in adjunctive with salbutamol in treatment of acute severe asthma. The dose is 250 microgram. We can add along with the salbutamol. 20 minutes every 20 minutes for 3 doses requiring initial treatment. Then every 4 hours we need to give the drug. Magnesium sulfate. This also we use in severe asthmatics. The mechanism of action is a calcium channel modulator. results in decreased acetylcholine and histamine release. It is usually reserved in cases of severe resistant asthma, usually not responding to routine therapy. Then we use magnesium sulfate. Dose is 20 to 50 milligram per kg. It should be diluted in normal saline and it should be infused over half an hour. The side effects of magnesium sulfate are like tachycardia, hypotension, muscle weakness at higher serum levels. Next is aminophylline. So it is useful in patients who do not respond well to beta agonists. We already discussed it as adenosine antagonist. It has a possible role in improving diaphragmatic contractility and inflammatory modulation. The loading dose we already discussed 5 to 10 mg per kg per hour, followed by 0.5 to 1 mg per kg per hour. This is the thing, like oxygen to maintain saturation of 90 to 95%. Salbutamol nebulization 3 doses at 20 minutes interval. Ipratropium nebulization 3 doses at 20 minutes interval. IV steroids, methylprednisolone, initial start dose followed by maintenance doses. Treat shock if at all it is present with 20 ml per kg of saline bolus. If improved, then continue with hourly nebulization with salbutamol. Increase nebulization intervals to 2 to 4 hourly and to continue steroids. If the child is not improving, then go with adrenaline, that is subcutaneous. Still with adrenaline, if the child is not improving, then go with the magnesium sulfate. Already discussed the dose. If the child is not improving on that, then give terpitalin infusion. And we have to monitor ST changes and to continue nebulizations. This child is still not improving, then we have to start aminophylline infusion. When we started aminophylline infusion, we have to reduce terpitalin infusion by 50%, and then at last to consider mechanical ventilation. For considering intubation, the absolute indications are like cardiac or respiratory arrest, severe hypoxia, rapid deterioration in mental state, patient with severe asthma working hard and tiring with no improvement despite of maximal therapy. Relative indications like relative hypoxemia for PO2 of less than 60, carbon dioxide retention of PCO2 of more than 65 mm of He, and metabolic acidosis. These are the relative indications for intubation. So this is the algorithm to treat. First is always give oxygen along with beta 2 agonist. Beta 2 agonist we use is salbutamol. Along with salbutamol we use anticholinergics. Not improving, go with IV steroids if the child is not able to take orally. Still not improving, then go with adrenaline, followed by magnesium sulfate, followed by aminophylline. If the child with all these measures we are unable to treat the episode of exacerbation and the child requiring alternative thing, then we have to consider intubation. But intubation is the last thing one should treat in asthma. So one have to be cautious in giving all these drugs because every drug has its own side effects. So prevention is better. So every acute exacerbation of asthma represents a failure of prevention. So education of the family is very important. First of all, patient education. Once patients understand about the disease and its treatment, control becomes very easy. First is acceptance of diagnosis should be there. Control but not necessarily cure can expect. Understanding the pathophysiology and triggering factors. So one should be aware in counseling regarding steroids and as well as side effects of steroids and to clear all the doubts regarding misconception in usage of steroids. And one must counsel regarding the asthma and exercise or activity. Consider informing the school teachers regarding the disease status. On discharge, patient attenders must be provided with an action plan to assist patients to prevent or treat asthma attacks. The plan should include how to recognize worsening asthma, how to treat worsening asthma, and how and when to seek medical attention. Utmost thing is one should avoid all allergen avoidance and avoidance of triggering factors like usually like pets, animals, outdoor allergens, irritants, chemicals, and all those things. And one must appropriately treat along with all these prevention things. One must treat the associated diseases like allergic rhinitis and sinusitis, gastroesophageal reflux. All these things one should take care. So this is the management of acute severe asthma and treatment of asthma, management of asthma. Am I clear? Anyone is there? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The class is done. Any doubts you can ask me. Vamsi, Sandeep, Isha. Everyone gave your attendance in your chat box, ma? I got only
Yes, ma'am.
86 members attendance here. Only 86 members gave. You people are right 130. Because I am not taking again attendance. Just I'll save this attendance of your chat box and I'll give to these people. Make sure that everyone gave your attendance in that chat box. Any doubts?
No, ma'am.
Let's start the class. Everyone gave attendance.